The topic of my persuasive essay is, should capital punishment be abolished? The purpose of my essay is to persuade the class that capital punishment should be abolished. Although capital punishment is still legalized in some states, I believe that it should be abolished based on my beliefs. Capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, is a government-sanctioned practice whereby a person is put to death by the state as a punishment for a crime. I will try to convince you that capital punishment goes against biblical teachings, then how many people are wrongfully put to death, and finally how it affects the family seeing their loved ones on death row. I will begin by discussing how capital punishment goes against biblical teachings. I strongly do believe capital punishment should be abolished. It goes against all that God believes in. The Bible says, "Thou shalt not kill." That's one of God's commandments. Many proponents of capital punishment interpret the phrase, "authority does not bear the sword in vain," in Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 5 in the New Testament. However, the point of this passage is that Christians must not use their freedom from the Old Testament religious laws as an excuse to violate the civil laws. We must obey civil authority, which is instituted by God because of fear of punishment as well as our conscience. Opponents of capital punishment see it as exactly the kind of revenge and human judgment that Jesus and his apostles so often warned us against. They believe the principles set forth by Jesus and the apostles restricted punishment to only that which is necessary to protect society. Opponents of capital punishment also point out that Jesus taught great principles for us to apply in our lives, rather than specific laws. Thus, his failure to specifically condemn slavery, capital punishment, and many other evils should not be interpreted as approval of those things. They see the mercy he showed to the woman caught in adultery, John chapter 8, verses 3 through 11, as his rejection of capital punishment. However, Jesus never specifically repudiated capital punishment. Some opponents of capital punishment see a prohibition against capital punishment in the Ten Commandments. Exodus chapter 20, verse 13 says, "Thou shalt not kill." Next, let me show you how many people are wrongfully convicted and put on death row for capital punishment. The death penalty carries the inherent risk of executing an innocent person. Since 1973, more than 165 people have been wrongfully convicted and sentenced to death in the United States have been exonerated. There is no number that can tell you the number of people who have been executed due to wrongfully being convicted, but I can give you a list of names of people who have been executed for it. Lena Baker was an African-American maid in Cuthbert, Georgia, United States, who was convicted of capital murder of her white employer, Ernest Knight. Even though Ms. Baker did kill Mr. Knight, it was done in self-defense, not how the court and the people of her community made it out to be cold-blood murder. Ms. Baker was kidnapped against her will by Mr. Knight and was forced to live with him. She was also forced to become an alcoholic again and forced to have sex with him. Another one is George Jonas Stinney Jr., who was only 14 years old when he died from the electric chair. Mr. Stinney was an African-American youth who was convicted in a proceeding later vacated as an unfair trial of murdering two white girls ages 7 and 11 in his hometown of Akula, South Carolina. He was executed by the electric chair in June of later that year. Anyone seeing their loved one being put to death for something they did do or they didn't do can be the hardest thing anyone has to go through. It is no way of mentally preparing yourself to say goodbye to that someone you've seen your whole life, forever. Nobody should ever have to go through something so heartbreaking and nerve-wracking. The death penalty does this to people. It takes away their hopes of seeing their loved ones ever again. It takes away their courage and pride. It takes away someone that could have been the only person there for them forever. It takes away love and it builds hatred towards the civil courts and the people who help push it through. The death penalty does not bring closure and interferes with their healing process. One of the saddest aspects of the death penalty is how it tears at the fabric of families, turning them against one another at the time when they are needed the most. Family members may have different feelings about the death penalty, and they are also pitted against each other as the case progresses towards execution. Tragically, every capital murder case involves at least one deceased victim. Vindication of victims and closures for victims' families are often held out as primary reasons for supporting the death penalty. However, many people in this circumstance believe that another killing will not bring closure and that the death penalty is a disservice to victims. In conclusion, no, I do not agree with capital murder punishment, and I do agree that it should be taken away from my own beliefs. I believe in the Bible, and killing someone is against God, and I do not want to be against a person that watches over me and continues to bless me abundantly, even when I do not deserve it.